through his illness and so on. They were truly a made-for-each-other couple, and may they both rest in peace. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Arthi Halbe. She is a CSR professional with 10 years of experience in corporate social responsibility, corporate citizenship, sustainable development, and communications, with work spanning both private and non-profit sectors in India and the US. Her interest lies in environmental conservation, water access and education, and the intersection of these with traditional livelihoods. Her current role is as an advisor in corporate citizenship at Fiserv India Private Limited. Fiserv is a US-based global fintech and payments company with solutions for banking, global commerce, merchant acquiring, billing and payments, and point of sale. She leads corporate citizenship and social responsibility across the 4 company entities, comprising about 8,000 plus employees in India. She works closely with India board members and the global corporate citizenship team on strategic planning, change management, aligning CSR to company goals, and integrating CSR into company culture. She does direct management of 10 to 15 NGO partnerships, including program planning, proposal evaluation, and so on. Prior to that, she was with a project coordinator with the Center for Pastoralism, Sajivan, which is the subject of the talk today, for which she curated exhibition titled Living Lightly, Journeys with Pastoralists, that explores the sustainability of pastoral livelihoods in India. In that effort, she raised funds from Indian and international funders and managed donor relations. She also led primary research, community archiving, and documentation at the grassroots with 30 plus communities and association of herders and artisans and musicians. In terms of her education, she's done her bachelor's in environmental sciences from University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And a personal link with my dad, she's done her master's at the London School of Economics, of which in environment and development. On a personal level, in addition to the link with London School of Business, I have known Arthi since she was a child, and I think we all look forward to a very interesting talk. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Arthi.
Thank you, Nitin. And before I invite Arthi to share her screen and speak, let me welcome a gentleman called Satish Gadday. If you're online, Satish, would you switch on your video for a minute? I'm not able to see you. He has been introduced by our member, Mr. S.S. Prasad. And what makes him unique is he is the 4th generation of his family practicing, I think Galaxy M11, your internet. Okay.
Totally.
Yeah, so he practices natural farming. And I just learned about him from S.S. Prasad like about an hour ago or so. But very nice to have you. Apparently, he is very accomplished in that technique, and he's received many awards, and he teaches in many universities as an invited faculty, I'm told. So one of these days, I'm sure we'll get to learn more about your work. We had a similar gentleman speak to us, I think 2 or 3 years ago. I will share those details offline. Thank you for joining us. With that, Arthi, the floor is yours, the virtual floor. You want to share your screen and begin?
Sure, I will do that.
Yep. Yes, we can see.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak with you today. And also thank you to the families that have endowed this particular talk. A little bit about me. So as you just heard, I work in corporate social responsibility and corporate citizenship now. From 2013 to 16, I was based out of Kutch in Gujarat. And I worked with an NGO called Sajivan, as you heard, with pastoralist communities across the district. And I was kind of drawn to Kutch because of my interest in conservation and livelihoods. I had just finished my master's. And I honestly didn't know very much about pastoralism myself when I got there. I was very, very new to it. And I've realized over the years since that it's actually a way of life that not too many people do know a whole lot about. So my goal today is to really give you an introduction to pastoralism through the lens of Kutch. There are many, many pastoralist communities across India and across the world, but I'll focus very specifically on Kutch and give you an introduction into how that way of life works there and why it's relevant. And I'll also tell you a little bit about the work I was doing there, which was building an exhibition that looked at pastoralism as kind of as a whole system, not just looking at the breeding or the grazing or the economics of it, but also looking at the culture that these communities have, the culture that they have, their heritage, the arts, the music, everything. Kind of trying to put as holistic of a view on it as possible. So with that, let me go ahead and get started. So why are we talking about pastoralism and who are pastoralists? So to start, pastoralists in essence are people whose livelihood depends on livestock and the animal products that come from them. And pastoralists are typically found in areas of scarce resources. So we're talking about arid and semi-arid environments. When we think about pastoralism in India specifically, I can go a little bit further, which is to say that usually more than 50% of the household consumption in a pastoralist household would be from animal products or the sale of animal products. And over 90% of their animals' consumption, which is to say their grazing, is from natural pasture. So it's from open grazing, not from fodder brought in for them. And lastly, the households themselves are typically entirely responsible for the entire breeding cycle that they have for the herds that they manage. And I mean, pastoralism, I think we've all seen a shepherd on the highway, right? It's one of the oldest ways of life. Joseph was a shepherd, Jesus was a shepherd, right? But very often today, it's considered a little behind. It's considered backward or outmoded, and people say, you know, who are these folks? Why don't they just settle down? You know, why do they have to keep wandering around? And what I would like to posit to the group today is that, you know, perhaps that's not the right way to look at it, because after all, pastoralism would not have lasted this long if it wasn't a viable livelihood. And it holds many, many lessons for us in today's world, and especially with the way that the world is changing. It also faces many challenges. And I'll get into the challenges a bit, but I think the fundamental dichotomy here is that pastoralists view their entire life is mobile. A lot of their work and their lives is centered on the ability to move freely and move across long distances. So for them, home is not necessarily a settled place. And that kind of goes counter to the way that maybe you and I operate, and also to the way that our policies are built. Because if you think about Indian policy overall, we look at the village level as the smallest level of, as the kind of the atom of our policies. So when you take someone out of a village and you put them in a very mobile space, it becomes difficult to address their needs. On the other hand, pastoralism provides to the economy. It has immense potential should we invest in it further and create ways to support it better. Second, pastoralists are very, very thoughtful animal breeders. They are the keepers of our Indian genetic diversity. And they are the ones who have bred local livestock breeds that can manage the environments that they live in, that thrive in the environments that they live in. And that knowledge and that adaptability has given them an immense amount of resilience when it comes to kind of facing their general environment tends to be one of scarcity, right? Rainfall will be scarce, fodder is scarce. It's a whole range of factors that come in. And the pastoralist livelihood is incredibly agile in that regard. It's very adaptable. They are able to tailor their response to any difficulty, and they do it very well. And lastly, there is a really, really rich cultural heritage, like I mentioned, that spans regions, it spans religions, it covers music, the arts, crafts, you name it. And there is a lot to learn and a lot to maintain there, especially because it's important to remember that that cultural heritage is tied intrinsically to their livelihood, right? It's tied intrinsically to their herds. And kind of as an umbrella over all of these 4 points, is that these communities are deeply connected to the land. They live very lightly. They don't leave as much of an ecological footprint as you or I might. And there is a lot to, there's a lot to learn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to explore these 4 points, which is to say economy, breed, resilience, and culture, through the stories of 2 unique breeds that are found in Kutch, Gujarat. One is the bunny buffalo, and one is the Qirai camel. And I hope that through these examples, I'll give you a little bit of a picture of the value of this way of life and why we need to support and invest in it. So let's start with Kutch. So Kutch district, as many of you know, is in northwest Gujarat. It's just very close to the Pakistan border. I hope you can see my mouse. So this line up here is the Pakistan border, and this sandy textured area is all the Great Run of Kutch. I was based in Bhuj. Kutch is unique in many ways. It is the largest district in India. It's about 45,600 square kilometers in area. And that is larger than the state of Haryana and also larger than the country of Switzerland. And conversely, it is also the most sparsely populated district in India. So if you look at obviously the 2021 census numbers aren't out, but if you look at the 2011 census, Kutch only had about 2 million people. So it's a very unique space within India as a whole. This map is actually one that I was working on when I was based in Kutch. And so I just wanted to say that although it says locations of pastoralist communities, in fact, there are pastoralist communities across the breadth of the district. What I have marked here is primarily where the buffalo herding communities are, which is where you see the blue dots, and where all the camel herding communities are. Sheep and goats tend to be across the entire landscape. And also this is a representation of home villages, not necessarily their movement patterns. So moving forward, Kutch is also very unique in that while many people think of it as only being scrub forest and salt, it's actually home to 5 distinct ecosystems. So we have scrub forest, we have the grasslands, which is where you'll find most buffaloes and cows in the district. You'll have the wetland. There's an enormous wetland called Chari Dand in the middle of the district. And if you're a birder, you probably know about it. You may have visited. It's supposed to be one of the best places for bird watching in the country. And this is also where all of the camels migrate in the winters because there's abundance of water in the area. There is, of course, the Run of Kutch. And along the coasts of the district, there are mangroves. And so a little bit about the communities that I worked with when I was in Kutch, and I will focus primarily on the buffalo and camel herding communities. I didn't work very closely with the sheep and goat herders, and that is a much larger scope than I'm able to cover in these 40 minutes. So Kutch, for example, Kutch is a bit of a melting pot. It shares a heritage probably most closely with Sindh, but it has been a meeting point of cultures and traditions for many, many years. And it's been a space of a great deal of migration. For example, a lot of pilgrimage to Mecca used to happen through Kutch. That was where the ships used to leave from. So there's been a tremendous number of people coming and going. In the Bunny region, which I'll talk to you a little bit about, which is the region that has all the buffalo herders, most of these communities are Muslim. 90% of Bunny is Muslim. And they're all communities that have migrated out from the Middle East over many generations. 10% of the area is Hindu, but those tend to be artisan communities rather than herders. And on the camel herding side, there are 2 communities that I worked with primarily. One are the Fakirani Jats, which you can see in these 2 photographs. The Fakirani Jats are Muslim as well, and they are far more nomadic and probably the most nomadic of the communities that we'll talk about today. And then also the Rabaris, who are Hindu, and also have kept camels traditionally. In all of these cases, the animals are tied very closely to the community's history, to their faith. And there's a very, very close link going through the years. A quick introduction to the breeds of the area. So you'll hear me talk a lot about the bunny buffalo today. This is one right here. They're very unique. They have very curled, tightly curled horns. We'll talk about the Qirai camel, which is unique because it swims. They're ecotonal. They live along the coast and they feed on mangroves, which means they swim out to the mangroves to graze. There's also the Kachi camel, which is inland and kind of grazes along the scrub forests across the center of the district. And there's the Kankrej cow. The sheep, there are actually two breeds. There's a Marwadi sheep and a Patanwadi sheep. And then this is the Kachi goat. So a quick word on challenges. And this slide really is representative of challenges that we definitely see in Kutch, but that are not unique to Kutch. These are quite common. So one is industry, or even if we don't say industry, we could say privatization of land without consideration for grazing. So in this picture, for example, this is very close to Mundra in Kutch, which you've all probably heard of the Mundra port. And this is the Tata power plant in Mundra. Now, if from where I am standing when I took this picture, if you turned around, you would actually see the Adani power plant right behind me. And what has happened is that the village that used to have a huge number of Qirai camels and Qirai camel herders is right in the middle of the two. And over time, I think today most of the herders have either sold their camels or moved away because the land was given over to companies and access to the mangroves got blocked completely. So the first time that I visited in 2013, they were going a full 15 kilometers further out of their way than they needed to get to their grazing spots. And a few years later, there was a barrier, there was a wall put up that prevented them from going that way. So there is a constant kind of push and pull in terms of when land is used or set aside for industry or mining or what have you, without taking into consideration what the needs of the local community might be. Second is highways. Most herders move quite long distances in search of good pasture. And there isn't any way for them to do so without avoiding highways most of the time. And so there is a lot of risk in losing animals, possibly being harmed yourself because of high-speed traffic. It's not something that has got a lot of airtime, but it is a very real concern and something that a lot of groups have been working on recently to look at how we might ameliorate that. Third is, and this picture is of a small farm in Western Kutch, but it's not really about farming. It's about the necessity of diversifying and changing your source of income. When there isn't access to markets or a kind of an investment in helping you keep your livelihood going, people obviously will shift to something else. So in many cases, we're seeing communities move to farming, move to jobs at the factories that have come up nearby, move into driving very often, general construction. There's a range of different jobs that are coming up, but it has in many ways pushed people out of their traditional livelihood. And although that is changing to some degree, and I'll talk to that when I come to the camel piece. And lastly, I just want to talk a bit about changing landscapes. What you see here, this tree, is what many of you might know as kikad. In Gujarat, in Kutch, they call it ganda bawad. It's Prosopis juliflora, and it's a highly invasive tree species. This was introduced in Kutch to prevent the run from spreading effectively. So the forest department introduced it, and the goal was to ensure that the run did not encroach into the grasslands. And it backfired in a sense because the tree has now taken over the entire landscape. And that's particularly relevant when we come to talking about bunny. So again, just to give you a bit of context of where we are, here is Kutch in Gujarat, and bunny shows up right in the kind of center north. Bunny was traditionally let me rephrase that. Bunny was one of the largest tropical grasslands in Asia at one time. Today, it's difficult to tell sometimes that it is a grassland. It covers 2,600 square kilometers, and it has a huge, huge number of buffaloes and cows. Now, as you can see in this picture, Gandabawad is everywhere. It's quite literally all the way across the landscape. This is what bunny often looks like over different seasons. Um, and what it's very interesting to see how the spread of this tree has impacted the way that the communities herd. So if you look at the livestock census from the 1950s for Gujarat, you'll see that in Kutch, 90% of the animals were cows, and they kept the Kankrej cow in the past. And many families still do breed the Kankrej cow. But over time, and I think prosopis was introduced in the 70s, so it's been the last 40 years or so that we're seeing a real shift. Over time, the balance is flipped. So there are now far more buffaloes than there are cows. And the reason for that is that cows cannot digest the pods of the prosopis juliflora. So when they eat that, they develop a condition that gives them lockjaw. Ultimately, they die. And they were losing a huge number of cattle because that is by far probably the most prevalent plant in the region now. And so it's very, very gradually and very systematically, the herders moved to breeding a buffalo that could withstand those conditions. So there is extremely, extremely scientific breeding practices at work here. What they've developed, because I think if any of us think about a buffalo, we most likely think about an area with adequate water. And Kutch is certainly not that. Kutch runs on every 5 years, there's a serious drought. Water is hard to come by, especially in Banni. And these are animals that are really, really well adapted to manage water stress. They are capable of handling the extremes that you see in the climate in Kutch. The winters can often drop down to 4 degrees or lower. The summers can hit 45, 50. So what the buffaloes actually do is they've learned to graze at night. So they go out by themselves, and depending on the season and the availability of grass, they might walk 3 to 4 kilometers at night. They might go up to 8 to 10 kilometers at night. And the most important thing, of course, is that they are capable of eating gandabawad, and it doesn't impact their milk production. It's really quite straightforward. So this is what you will see if you go into Kutch at all, if you go into Banni at all. And also, the other thing I wanted to call out is that in Banni, there are 19 panchayats. You can see them marked out over here. And while there is an understanding that, you know, each village has its own grazing area, they manage, everything is done in collaboration with each other. If there are years when there is more rain, say in Eastern Banni and Berdo, then all the buffaloes will go there and they are welcomed. There is no, this is mine and that is yours. It's shared, and it's understood that the way that the grazing needs to proceed is in a way that doesn't overgraze any part, so that every year there is sufficient fodder for the animals. And also it's very interesting to see that in Banni, you actually very rarely see sheep or goats. And that's by design. A herder had once told me that they didn't encourage keeping sheep or goats in Banni because the way that sheep and goats eat grass is they kind of yank it up by the roots. What cattle do and what buffaloes do is they just graze off the top and the roots stay intact. And so you have better regrowth of grass. So you tend to see sheep and goats much more in kind of the thorny scrub parts of the district. And this region tends to be primarily cattle and buffaloes. So, you know, the really interesting thing about the Banni buffalo is, so in 2010, it became recognized by the National Board of Animal Genetic Resources as the 11th distinct buffalo breed in India. And that is a process that the NGO I was working with, Sarjeevan, was working on for quite some time. There is a robust Banni Breeders Association, an association of the herders in the region, who we worked with. There was a collaboration with universities, with academics, to put the, you know, there's a pretty detailed process in getting a new breed recognized. And on getting breed recognition, it's been a significant boost for the economy in the region. One is that the cost of a buffalo went up. It used to be around 30,000. It's now gone to 60 to 80K roughly per buffalo. And there are occasions when you can sell a really, really well-bred buffalo for like $1.5 lakh. In Banni, animal trade and milk sale accounts for over 90% of their turnover. A few years ago, they were producing about 1.5 crore liters of milk per year and selling at least 15,000 animals per year. And the thing about having a herd of buffaloes, keeping livestock, is that there isn't really a need to invest heavily at the beginning of each year. Your capital is actually appreciating, because if you're caring for your herd right and taking care of your breeding well, you only have more every year as you go on. And what this also does is it allows you a great deal of resilience when you're facing hardship. So there are, of course, multiple challenges that are inherent to life in Banni. And one of those, of course, is drought. And there are years of intense drought when you have to kind of bring in fodder from outside. Some years they've actually had to take buffaloes on trucks and travel to different parts of the district to ensure grazing. But there's also the fact that, every year, if there is a year of good rain, they store fodder. They keep it available for years of scarcity. And they also know how to handle, it's very common to lose animals in heavy rains. And when people lose part of their herds, there's an acceptance of it, in that rain is absolutely necessary. Everybody understands the importance of rain in an arid district like Kutch. And so you might lose your animals, that's fine. But the community will sustain and the community will move on, because the very basis of their livelihood is to be resilient and to be able to bounce back with even a small number of livestock. Secondary livelihoods, of course, exist in Banni. A lot of people are working on charcoal, like making charcoal, because of there's a lot of Gandabawad, so they use that and produce coal. There's also a number of factories in the region, a lot of people working there. And of course, let's not forget Ranutsav, which happens just here. If you have been to the Run of Kutch for Ranutsav, it happens just around Dhordo. So this is the entry point that you would have visited. And that's also a huge employment for the herders of Banni. So, one second. Oh, no. Yeah, I just wanted to show you, every village has a small milk collection center. And then there are different points in different parts of Banni along the main roads that are larger collection centers. So usually the milk will move from the village level to a more centralized location, and then from there get transported out to Bhuj every day. It's primarily buffalo milk that comes in from here. Enormously, like I think 13% fat. And a buffalo gives about 5 to 6 liters a day at least. So just shifting aside from Banni for a second, and I think while in the story of Banni, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the economy and the breed. Here, when it comes to the camels, I really want to talk about that adaptability and agility that I mentioned, and especially when it comes to grazing and grazing access and how they move. So what you see here is actually a map of the different grazing routes of camels in Kutch. There are 13 distinct grazing clusters, usually based around where the herders are based with their herds. So if they're in Lakpat, they're usually moving through kind of this sector over here. And if they're in the east of Kutch and Lagad, they're usually moving through this sector. Every season, the route is different. And this was a very interesting process that Sarjeevan conducted, where we actually went out and met with herders and sat down with, a topographical map, kind of a Google Maps printout of where we were, laid just plastic over it, and had the herders tell us which direction they moved in, kind of got them oriented. And that's how this was put together. And in the process, one of the questions that often came up is, who leads who? Does the herd lead you, or do you lead the herd? And the answer is very, very interesting, because in most cases, the herder would say, the herd leads us. So there are two breeds of camels in Kutch. Here I have put most of my focus on the Qirai camel because they're absolutely fascinating creatures. So this, in this lower left corner, this is a Kachi camel. This is in Nakhatrana Taluka, like it's kind of center west Kutch. And this was just last month when I was visiting. These three pictures are of Qirai camels. Here you can see the camels entering a creek where they go to swim. And this is kind of more of a kind of on the parts of the mangroves that you can actually walk in. And lastly, over here you see a baby. Two babies were born the night before, and so the herder had come a very long distance and brought fodder for them to eat, so that the mothers didn't have to go out too far. So the Kachi camels, like I said, are further inland. They're grazing on the scrub and thorn forest. The Qirai camels are completely different, and they're quite endangered. There's only about 5,000 of these across the whole of Gujarat, and even that number is a bit old now. So I'm not sure what it is today, but they swim. And you might have heard of the swimming camels of Gujarat. If you look on YouTube, you'll find a number of videos. There was recently a BBC news clip about them as well. But they eat primarily saline plant species. And so there is, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about both of their grazing patterns, because it's really fascinating of who goes where do they stay, why do they stay, and what are the thought processes behind where they go. So I'm just going to come back to this map for a moment. The Qirai camels are based in Bhachau and in Lakhpat and Abdasa along these coasts. What's very interesting is when we were visiting herders in Bhachau, they told us, the creeks are very important. The creeks are where they teach the baby camels how to swim. And so you always want to bring your young camels to the creeks so that they learn before they have to go into the wider waters with the rest of the herd. And so that would be timed kind of around, I think most young camels are born in the winters. And in the winters, this is where Charidand is, here in the center. And you'll see about 2,000 plus camels migrate there in the middle, like usually in December, January, if you go out, you'll see them. And that's where they gather because that's where the most water is. But it's also a good place for breeding. So you'll find a lot of babies if you come out in the very early parts of the year over here. In terms of where they go and why they go, there's a lot of barriers to camels movement, and especially I think I spoke a little bit about industry already. In Kutch, border security is also a challenge in a sense. Of course, the border security force is doing their job. There's no question, but there is challenges often because if the person from border security is not fully oriented to what's happening with the herders, there are frequent kind of mix-ups where someone gets arrested for going somewhere they weren't supposed to be, and a lot of miscommunication can happen. But on the whole, that's a smaller concern than, say, what happens with industry or protected areas. A really interesting story around protected areas is with the Narayan Sarovar Sanctuary. The Narayan Sarovar Sanctuary is over here in Lakhpat, somewhere around here. And there was a time when the forest department was, there were frequent words with the Maldharis, with the herders about, hey, you aren't supposed to bring your camels in here to graze. And the herders kept going. And at some point when we were doing this mapping exercise, we said, but why? Why do you have to go right there every year when you know that the forest department is going to give you trouble for it? And they said, no, it's like this. It's part of our monsoon route. And when we go, the camels always know when to go. The camels take us there. And there's a 15-day window after the rains when there's a particular creeper that they need to eat, and that improves their immunity for the rest of the year. And so it's a non-negotiable in a sense, right? And of course, I mean, there is a lot to be said, which I won't be able to get into right now, but there is, of course, a lot to be said about how pastoralism is considered kind of in this mode of saying, oh, it's backward or they don't know what they're doing. There's a concept that herders will overgraze the land, that if you let them into a protected area, you will destroy the land. And that's absolutely not true, because these are people who really deeply understand the importance of keeping an ecosystem in balance and of allowing it to revitalize itself year after year. So there is a lot of work that has been happening around camel grazing access. Kutch is actually a smaller microcosm. There's a lot of work also happening in Rajasthan. And yeah, if anybody is interested in learning more about this, please do feel free to ask questions as we go along. In terms of income, camel herders they've faced greater challenges, I would say, than the buffalo and cow herders. And we've seen very, very high diversification of livelihoods over the years. And this has been changing, actually. Over the last 5 years, we've been seeing a lot of people coming back to herding. And the reason for this is that camel milk received FSSAI certification in 2016. And that was let me tell you, a very long process. It took a few years to make that happen. But today, Amul and some other private companies, Advik Foods among others, run dedicated camel milk dairies in Kutch. And we've seen the price of milk, the price that the herders are receiving, go up from 18 to 20 rupees a litre 8 years ago to 50 rupees a litre today. So it's really changed the game in the way that people are thinking about camel herding now, thinking about their own livelihood. There's a lot of folks coming back into it and kind of getting involved. And we're also seeing camel milk starting to be marketed all over the country. So in Bangalore alone, I have found Amul camel milk bottles. Amul also makes camel milk chocolate. And it's really exciting to see that, because it's all coming from these regions and coming from areas that, I mean, I have been to many times. This is just another example of kind of a challenge that camel herders can have. So along the coast of Bhachao, there's a huge, this is in Eastern Kutch, there is a huge amount of salt pans that have come in. And again, the salt pans tend to block off mangrove access. They often mangroves are supposed to be protected forests, but in many places that isn't really respected. And what happens when the salt pans get set up is that they flood over the trees and the salinity pretty much kills them. So a lot of mangroves die in the process of setting up salt pans, and the camels have to go much, much further to get to pasture. And so just coming back to that question of living lightly and resilience, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. One is that we saw this picture earlier of the Qirai Camels and the fodder that had been brought to them. The herder had to bring that fodder across many kilometers through salt pans to bring it back to the camels who couldn't go out to pasture. And it was just something that had to be done. There was no other way around it. Second is, this is kind of an idea of what a settlement on the move might look like. This again was last month. So Kutch had quite a lot of rain in August and September this year. So you'll see a lot of plastic tarps out. But it's not always like this. In the summers, you might just see a couple of things propped up, some cloth here and there, and they leave almost no footprint as they move along. This picture is interesting because this was taken the morning after incredibly heavy rains. And this Rabari family had 200 sheep, out of which they lost 3/4 of their herd. And what happened in the morning when we drove out to visit, it was a planned visit. None of us knew this was going to happen. And we got out there and there was just dead sheep everywhere. And the young goats and sheep that they wound up just they were buying milk from a local dairy because they didn't have the animals to provide them with milk anymore. And it was, I mean, of course, people will be sad, but there is an acceptance of the fact that these things happen and an understanding that there is an ability to bounce back. And so when we got there, they were packing up. Most sheep and goat herders will always have 3 or 4 camels to carry their household goods with them. So that's what you see over here. And they put the baby goats and sheep on top of the khatlas, on top of the camel, and they moved on. And it was, to me, it seemed like a tragedy, but to them, it was a setback. But, life went And then I just wanted to highlight, as I kind of start to move into talking a little bit about the arts and culture, these are the homes that the Fakirani Jats build. And they're built entirely by the women every year with local grasses. And these settlements are quite permanent. This is a village called Dragavand in the very western tip of Kutch. And they rebuild them every year, they have to. But it is really remarkable when you step into one of these structures. It could be 45 degrees outside and you won't need a fan on the inside. It's warm, of course, but it's absolutely manageable, and it's so well adapted to the local environment that it's really one of the most remarkable living structures I have seen personally. A lot of what I did when I was working in Kutch was I started to document the relationships between the herders and the artisan communities in Kutch. And those were both trade relationships as well as social. And I'll talk a bit about one or two of the others, but I think bells are the most fascinating, especially since we've been talking about this idea of grazing access and movement across large areas. And I think all of us have probably seen these bells somewhere or the other. You might have one in your home. But the interesting thing about these copper bells is that this is a very, very live relationship between the artisans and the herders. And to this day, both artisans and herders will say that the best quality and the best money for a bell always comes from a herder in the region. That's because they know the value. And so when we started investigating, what is it about the bells? Why do you need them? We got a very interesting answer. So there are three distinct sounds to a copper bell. One is called sarai, which is what they say is the sweetest sound, and which you will find across all of the types of animals in the district. There's another sound called uthod, which is a little sterner, a little harder. And then there's one called hakkad, which is more resonant and which you can hear from longer distances. And what a herder will do is he will buy a bell or a set of bells, and the artisan will tune it to a sound that the herder likes. And then the herder will take it back to their village, and you see this kaka here who's tuning a bell. There's always one person in the village who is a specialist in tuning the bells. And he will sit and kind of get it to a particular tone, a particular pitch. And that will be unique to that particular herder's herd. So what that really means is when you go out into Banni or into any of the grazing areas, when you hear the bells, you and I might just hear a bell, right? Nothing unique about it. But the herder can often tell not only whose herd it is, but which part of the herd it is. Because say you have 30 buffaloes. The first 10 will have the largest. There'll be one buffalo in the front of the herd that has the largest bell. One of the ones that hovers in the middle will have kind of a medium size, and then there'll be another one on the last. And the herder can always tell, and it allows them from a distance to know not only where their herd is, but which part of their herd is where. And they'll also often attach a louder bell to buffaloes that have a tendency to kind of stray off on their own path. Similarly with the camels often use the sound called hakkad because it travels longer distances is what they say. And because camels move further and wider, and there are times when you might not even be able to see your herd, you're still able to keep in touch and hear it where you go. And particularly in Banni, they say that 30 years ago, before Ganda Bawat became a problem, there used to be grasses so high that you couldn't see a buffalo through them. And so you needed the bells even more at the time. But what all the herders say even today is that as long as they have access to open grazing, that relationship with the copper bell artisans is going to sustain because they're always going to need them. And so when it came to telling a story and building an exhibition about the herders, it was an exercise that we wanted to do not as people. I mean, of course, I'm naturally an outsider to Kutch, but it was something that we very much wanted the herders themselves to have a voice in, and they guided us across the entire process of kind of highlighting which issues we should bring out, and helping us understand how we could tell those stories in the best way. And one of the projects that I worked on, which I was which was really special, I think we did this over a year or two, is in the Banni region, the women often do not meet with men outside of their community. And they also, they all usually will not be photographed, and you cannot record their voices. And so a large question that we had, because I spent a lot of time in Banni, and truly the landscape is unimaginable without the women. But how do you show that to an external audience, right? If you can't photograph them. And so what we did was we turned to the embroidery, because every community in Kutch has its own distinct style of embroidery. And Banni, it's actually a huge source of income for many families. And we wound up creating these kits of 3 by 3 inches. And we took them from village to village and asked women to give us a square of embroidery. And after we had done this in Banni, we actually sewed together all the patches we had from Banni, which is what you see here in the central photo, and took it out to Rabari and Jat villages and the camel herding areas to bring them on board and to show them what we were trying to do. And in the end, we had 900 of these patches that and I'll show you a couple of images from the exhibition as well, but it was a really beautiful way to bring them into that space. Especially for the women who weren't able to travel and come and see it themselves. Other enduring relationships that I just want to highlight is that of the weavers and the dyers with the herders. And we always, I mean, I think everyone knows that when we think of Kutch, we think of crafts, we think of the run. But the herders are such an intrinsic part of the entire history of how many things came to be. So if you look at these traditional wool wedding shawls that the Rabaris wear, and that you'll often see now, a lot of people are buying them even in urban spaces, but the sheep wool would come from the sheep that the herders owned. The weaver would spin it, he would weave it. It would go on to a member of the Khatri community who would do the bandhani, do the dyeing, and then it would come back to the herder, who would sit and kind of add the embroidered borders and ready it for use. And so these closed loop economies and these relationships, both social and trade-based, they're still alive. They've changed naturally over the years, and we explored a lot of that in the exhibition. But these are living pieces of our culture and our history. And they really speak to a different way to look at economies and look at circular economies, look at how we invest in communities and how we consider that culture is often tied to livelihood, and there is a lot of value in sustaining those livelihoods in order to sustain our collective history and tradition. So I wanted to just give you a few glimpses of what the exhibition had looked like. We'd done these, for example, in the bottom right. These are the canopies that we did with the women's embroidery. We had a number of bells and different sounds. I had a truly hilarious afternoon with a colleague trying to distinguish between the 3 sounds of bells, and we were wholly incapable. We had to call in a herder to help us do that. But we also, the exhibition has been up twice now, once in Delhi and once in Ahmedabad. And every time we have invited herders from around the country. So it has been a meeting ground. And so it's been a meeting ground for pastoralists as well. So we've had a lot of conclaves where pastoralists have talked about common issues. We've also hosted academic conferences. India's pastoralism is not as deeply studied and researched as that in the Middle East or in Africa. And so there is a lot of work happening to build up our understanding of pastoralism in India and bring it to greater awareness. So over time, the aim for this exhibition is going to be that it's going to incorporate the stories of other pastoralist groups in India. So Living Lightly was actually scheduled to come to Bangalore last year. It's been postponed due to the pandemic. But when it does come, it will focus on the herders from the Deccan, and it will start to incorporate a new story. And the hope is that we will bring this to more regions of the country. We will talk about it more, and really bring this incredible culture and this incredible history to greater awareness and greater understanding so that we can start to make the changes that we need to ensure that their livelihood sustains further. That is all I have. So I'd be happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Aarti. You held us in rapt attention, I must say, especially the beautiful pictures you have that make it so alive, when you're speaking. Would you like to unshare your screen now? Thank you. Great. So we have some questions coming up, but just to kick it off, I wanted to understand from you, what was the driving factor in your choosing this topic for your research in 3 years there, to spend your time in Kutch and work with this NGO?
Mm-hmm.
What was the kind of personal prime objective for you? And second is, what is sought to be accomplished by this exhibition that you have curated and you're taking all over the country? And then we'll take up some more questions which are coming.
Sure. So I actually, I kind of wound up in Kutch by accident. It wasn't planned. But when I was doing my master's, I got very interested in Indian forest policy, and was particularly interested in the Forest Rights Act and how that was being implemented across India. I don't know if you're not familiar with the Forest Rights Act. It basically gives communities the right to claim community ownership of forest land and maintain and manage it in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came back from my master's, I visited a friend who was living in Kutch at the time, and I met some of the NGOs nearby. I met Sir Jeevan and realized that so in Kutch, they've actually, in Banni specifically, the herders filed a collective claim over the grassland a few years ago. So Banni is actually technically a protected forest. There's a complicated legal history there. But the Maldharis, the herders, qualify as other traditional forest dwellers, which is a category in the law. And they have filed a collective claim for community management control over the grassland. So that has been in process for the last 5 or 6 years. But that was really my driving force, was I wanted to understand how that was being implemented on the ground. And to your second question, I'm sorry, repeat your second question for me.
What is the objective of this exhibition you have curated and taking all over the country?
So I wasn't the curator. I was kind of the anchor managing the entire process. The curator is a woman named Sushma Iyengar, who's based out of Kutch. The exhibition had multiple aims. One was, of course, bring a deeper understanding of pastoralism to a wider swath of India, and especially to be able to speak at different levels, just to the layman, but also to have the ability to go deeper for anyone who wanted to explore the ways that the system works and how they are, how does this happen? So if you're interested in the crafts, there was a piece on that. If you're interested in getting into the breeding, there was a piece on that. But more than that, it was really about, it was also about driving policy. So a really important part has been making sure that herders themselves are coming. And so we had a lot of conversations about what language do you do this exhibition, right? Because how do you make it accessible to the people who are coming? And so we wound up doing, I think we did Hindi and English in Delhi, and then they did Gujarati translations when we did it in Ahmedabad. And I'm not sure what the plan is. I haven't been too involved with the planning for the next part of it. But there have been constant discussions about the fact that this exhibition cannot only speak to an urban Indian. It needs to speak to the herders themselves, and it needs to give them insight into ways that their own, their fellow herders are living in different parts of the country. So there have been extensive talks. Every single time both times we've held the exhibition, and in smaller forums over the years. there have been more and more meetings happening with pastoralists of different regions. Actually, in the wake of the exhibition, a new organization was stood up called the Center for Pastoralism, which now works at a national level and is kind of leading a lot of research on pastoralist issues around the country. And of course, and that is both academic and ground level. So we are, I mean, of course, a part of it is also ultimately to impact policy and to have people take notice of what is happening. And that's a multi-tier process. So we're trying to attack it from all angles. Yeah.
Any luck in getting any minister from the animal husbandry, agriculture interested?
Yes, there is a lot of collaboration with the government.
I
The
see.
government is not at all disengaged from this.
Okay.
Many people who have come to the exhibitions, and also I think in Kutch itself, Sarjeevan works very, very closely with the animal husbandry department. So it's ongoing.
Very good. So Nitin has a few questions. The first one, of course, is whether you can replicate the many advantage of the bunny buffalo in other parts of India which are water stressed, and if the local communities or government or panchayats are doing anything in terms of rainwater harvesting with check dams so that the herds and herders don't have to travel great distances.
Right.
And the third part is, what are the key differences between the camel milk and buffalo milk in terms of nutrition levels, medicinal properties? Some people say that it has got medicinal properties or any such. What are the differences?
Sure. So just going with the first question about the bunny buffalo, I'm fairly certain that the buffalo is purchased by buyers in other parts of the country. I don't have any specific data on that, but every year, for example, in Kutch, there's what the Bunny Pashu Mela is held every year by the Bunny Breeders Association, which is a huge mark. I mean, people come from all over, and it's primarily for animal sales. So that is happening, and I know that they are definitely being used in different parts of Gujarat. I don't know too much about what the sales figures are like for outside. In terms of rainwater harvesting, yes, absolutely. There's a lot happening at the local level. There's a lot, they're both at the village level in terms of what different communities have planned for themselves. In Banni specifically, they have traditional systems called viddas, where the whole community will build a very deep well. I have pictures of those, which I'll be happy to send you. But they have a traditional system by which they maintain the drinking water source both for the people and for the animals consistently. And those will, sometimes in the dry seasons, you can see all the way into the well and see the water at the bottom. And in the good rains, it'll actually fill up to the point that the entire, the whole Veda is built kind of in a depression, and the whole depression will fill up, so it'll look like a lake. But yeah, there is a lot of work happening on water access. And lastly, between camel milk and buffalo milk, I'll be honest, I can't tell you the absolute detail, but it has been researched quite significantly. Camel milk is very low in fat and very low in lactose. And so it's typically, I've heard tell that it is suitable for people who are more lactose intolerant. And it's, I mean, in terms of nutritional value, I couldn't tell you the exact details right now, but there is a huge difference. There is a huge difference in the in what camel milk offers versus buffalo milk. And I mean, just speaking from personal experience, we spoke with many herders who said that, you know, people in the villages were drinking camel milk to control their blood sugar. I will speak for myself and just say that camel milk is kind of like Red Bull. Like, I've never had so much energy from just a cup of milk in my life. But no, in terms of the actual key differences, I would need to come back to you. I don't have that right off.
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Bose wants to know, apart from the ability to swim, what are the other distinguishing features of or differences between the Kutchi and Khari breeds of camels?
Yeah, it's often they look very similar actually. So the Qirai Camels are actually a bit smaller, and I think it is a noticeable difference. They are like quite a bit shorter than the Qirai Camels, and they tend to be darker in color. The wool is also much finer, and I don't know if that's down to because of how they swim or what it is, but they are. there's not a, to the layperson, honestly, there wouldn't look like a lot of difference. But it is mostly in the grazing patterns and the way that they live that you see the largest difference.
How much does a camel typically cost? You gave us the figures of buffalo.
Around 15 to 25,000. It varies.
Oh.
Yeah.
And is the meat also sold? I mean,
no, the Kachi herders do not sell the meat.
No?
So I remember that there was one herder that I had met who everyone told me that, you would hear everyone kind of gossip about him and they'd be like, he sells camels for meat, so we don't sell to him. Because in the religious context, right, like the Rabaris look to Momaima, who rides a camel. So she is always portrayed as seated on the camel. For the Fakirani Jats, they look to someone they called Savla Pir, who also kept Qirai Camels. And so there is a strong religious tie for both communities to those camels. I've met Fakiranis who won't even sell the milk. Because they say that it is only meant for the babies and it is not for them to, they won't, actually out of camel milk, you actually won't even see people making chas or anything. They won't change it in any way. They won't split the milk. They'll make, but it's not like with buffalo milk where you see ghee being made, dahi being made, all kinds of things. Camel milk is just milk.
I see. Interesting. I remember a story during the first lockdown during the pandemic. Who's this guy, the actor who's helping a lot of people? Sonu something.
Not sure.
Anand, do you know the name of the guy?
Sonu Sood?
Sonu Sood, yeah. So there's some, infant in Bombay, and that child can only take camel milk because of it, probably lactose intolerant. And he went out of the way to arrange for camel milk to be brought all the way from Gujarat. It was all over the news at that time. So it's an interesting thing, what you just mentioned about lactose quantity or the level of lactose being lower in that. We have an observation from Mr. S.S. Prasad. He's kind of comparing and contrasting, the savannas, the grazing herds, on savannas and woodlands there, maintain the biodiversity of that region and prevent them from evolving into dense shrubland or forest. Now, is that also true in the Kutch context? How biodiversity is maintained, like you mentioned?
I mean, yes, because see, all of these scrub forests, they are incredibly diverse to begin with, right? When you look at the landscape that camels are grazing through, even in Banni, the grasses, there's about 33 different varieties of grass that grow. Different varieties of climbers, different varieties of creepers, in addition to the trees and everything else that is inherent there. So while the precipice has taken a lot of the Banni landscape over, there is still tremendous diversity and a lot of work is going in right now with the herders in Banni to preserve their grasses and to encourage and to ensure that their grass diversity is maintained. In the scrub forests, I mean, it's a straightforward piece, right? You graze your animals through a particular area, and then you move on, and you will ultimately circle back. So it's not so much. I mean, it's not so much about maintaining the biodiversity as much as being part of the inherent cycle in that region, right? They aren't an addition in any way. They have been there for a long time. And also just there isn't any I think I don't know that I can comment necessarily on the rejuvenation of soil. I don't think I know enough on that front, but from my understanding on the grazing front, it is absolutely not an imposition to have the herders there. In fact, they are a natural part of the balance that comes through.
He was also wondering about the nutrient protein levels of the grasslands vis-a-vis the cultivated fodder for the animals.
I'm not sure.
You're not sure about. Okay. I think the next one that your dad wants to know, I think you mentioned it. He was the same thing that I asked. What is the attitude of the government in understanding these challenges of the herders,
Right.
preserving that whole, should I say, system of life, which is a part of our culture? And
Right.
is there any attempt to address these issues to, for help them surmount some of the difficulties they are facing or challenges they're facing?
Yeah, I would say that from what I've experienced on a local level, absolutely. There is a lot of collaboration with the local governments. There is an understanding, especially at the state level, of what is happening and how, and creating avenues in which to support. I would say that the gap really comes in this in this concept of understanding mobility and understanding the gaps that herders can often fall in. I'll give you an example. Ration cards often get tied to the village, the home village. Now, when you are in a position that you are constantly moving, you might not be near that village at all, right? So
Yeah.
education becomes a gap because kids might not go to school as much because if they're on the move, one, the family might need them to support the livelihood. Two, often they might not trust to send them to a school in a village that they don't know, right? And then how long can you enroll them for? You have to keep moving. So there are the very, very basic things that just kind of fall through the crevices because there isn't an ability to address them. And that is also why the work has begun in earnest to have pastoralists from different regions connect. Because once we understand the scope at a national level, then it becomes possible to address it from a policy perspective as well. But there's simply right now there isn't even a fully reliable count of how many herders we have in the country. It's probably between 2 to 7% of our population, but we don't know for sure.
Mhm.
It isn't marked in the census, it isn't really tracked.
I have another question. Before that, we have some input from Dr. Seshu Babu. He's joined us from Cambodia. He says camel milk is closest to human milk, which is very rich in antioxidants and preferred by those who are lactose intolerant, like what you've said. And it is a preferred milk for diabetics, I'm told, and is best consumed after being pasteurized and vitamin A and D fortified, just for information of our other participants. So I have the next question from Nitin, and I want to elaborate a little bit more on what he's written. That is, do the younger generation of these pastoralists take up the same way of life? And to add to that, what is the economic status of this particular group of people? When you look at the national demographics, are they below the poverty line, or just slightly above it? And do many of them want to come out of that lifestyle, the general ambition or their aspiration?
Right.
I mean, again, to quote unquote, not to be judgmental, do they want to get into mainstream? Like how the rest of the society perceives this as being backward.
Right. I mean, yes, in many cases, I think it's a mix, honestly. There are many who stay with the livelihood and there are many who want to step out. And especially, I would say it's very interesting, like it isn't necessarily one or the other because in every family, you will see a range where one or two of the kids will be in herding, someone else will have a factory job, someone else will be a driver, so and all of them, most of these communities do still tend to live in more joint structures than nuclear families. So you have a unit where the money is coming in from different streams. Culturally, do most of them want to, I mean, there's an unwillingness to let go of this way of life. But at the same time, there's an understanding that it might not possibly provide all the money that you need, right? So in terms of economics, I would say probably a good number below the poverty line, but a good number above as well. Again, it varies depending on which part of the district, what animal, what your milk market is like, etc.
How is their, as a group, what are their levels of health? because they have a very different lifestyle. I'm assuming their immunity levels and health levels are much better compared to the common population in that area.
That's a good question, and I'm not sure I have an educated enough answer for it. They're definitely, I would say they're definitely, I mean, they're very resilient, but I don't know if I can comment.
Just the fact that they're constantly walking, moving, as opposed to.
I mean, I've seen, especially camel herders, you'll often see them going on just camel milk and like one meal a day. And they seem fine. But that's not necessarily, I mean, I don't know how much of that is also due to access of grocery and what you can carry with you, etc. Right? So I'm not sure I can answer that in full.
Okay. How do they vote? Your dad wants to know whether they can come out and vote for, make Narendra Modi the Prime Minister the next time.
Absolutely, they vote. Like everyone, I mean, there are probably very few who don't, but
I see. Okay.
Very much active in the civic process.
I see. Nitin wants to know if there are other international level organizations, doing similar studies like you in other countries. And can you kind of give examples of any such communities existing in developed nations?
Yes, I mean, I'm pretty sure. So there is a European federation that works with herders across Europe. So I know that that exists. There is, so in the FAO, the UN FAO has a pastoralist knowledge hub that is very active around, like it's headquartered in Rome. They do a lot of work there, especially engaged in Gujarat. They work primarily with Marag, which is an NGO that works out of Ahmedabad area, which also works with other herders across Gujarat. But no, there is a lot. I think in Africa, it's very well researched and very well studied. The thing is, right, when you look at like, say the Middle East or you look at Africa, often the way that herds are, like not herds, sorry, the way that these communities are organized is there are often groups that are associated with, those communities specifically will be associated with livestock herding for many generations and are a distinct group that have a distinct resource, that a distinct space that they access, a distinct region, all of that. In India, we're looking at a situation where they're often, I mean, they're integrated into the caste system, obviously. And so you'll have members, like you'll have agrarian and pastoralist communities living side by side and sharing resources. So you'll see a lot of overlap between herders and farmers in India, in a way that you might not see in different regions. But yeah, there's a European organization. There's a lot of work happening in Africa. A lot of universities tend to have kind of, there'll be many conferences that will link people working on these spaces. And definitely, I mean, yeah, the organizations like the UN are great. I went to in Hyderabad in 2012, there was the Conference of Parties on the Biological Diversity Convention on Biological Diversity. And that was actually where I met Sajeevan for the first time. There was a huge number of organizations working with herders internationally who had come to meet over there. So there is a lot of work happening.
Does US have any such thing of the Native Americans?
Oh, good question. I'm not sure. Not in this way, I don't think.
Yeah. Doesn't seem so, because I think herding was, I mean, I don't remember ever reading anything about such a thing in the American history or even in the old movies. So I'm not sure. But anyway, and there's of course many messages in praise of your very nice presentation, your pictures, and the good talk. So thank you very much. It was really delightful I'm sure many people who are on the call today did not know what to expect. Pastoralism is not a very commonly heard word. Though I think since many people do come from rural backgrounds in India, they would have seen it, especially sheep herders. And you didn't mention, but in some parts of India, I remember as a child in some village, ducks.
Yes.
People used to bring ducks, park them in the farm for 2-3 days, 4 days. It was good manure, and then they move on.
Yep.
So I remember that, from way back in 60s, I think. I don't recall. So I think it's a very fascinating subject you have chosen. And the reason I asked you that question is you went to London School of Economics and then went to Kutch to do your work. So I was wondering, you're bridging that two very vastly different, areas of knowledge or education or work or culture. But thank you so much. And thank you for putting together a great, set of slides.
Thank you.
I think it's hereditary in your, we still remember your dad's East Africa pictures. Many of them have commented. Thank you, Arti. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
If there are no other questions, we are nearing the closing time. We had some people who joined us late. Narsimha, he joined us from Indian Institute of Science, erstwhile Indian Institute of Science, I say. And there are, of course, some people I don't recognize, but then I'm sure you all enjoyed the talk. May I now call upon our secretary, Mr. Subhash Chandra Bose, to propose the formal vote of thanks.
President of FOSWL Hyderabad, Sri Venkateswara Rao Garu, distinguished speaker, Ms. Arthi Halbe, family and friends of Sri Telikapalli Subbaramaya and Srimati Telikapalli Kamalamma, Dr. G.R. Dalvi and Mrs. R.G. Dalvi, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us this 154th monthly meeting on Zoom. We thank the family members of Sri Telikapalli Subbaramaya and Srimati Telikapalli Kamalamma and Dr. G.R. Dalvi and Mrs. R.G. Dalvi for establishing an annual endowment lecture in their names in the month of October. We also thank Sri Vijay Raghavan Endlur for the annual logistics sponsorship for the month of October every year in the name of his father, Sri E.N. Purushottaman, who had a distinguished career in the Intelligence Bureau. Most of us, when we first saw the invite and the subject of the talk, might certainly have been unsure of what to expect. Some of us senior citizens who hail from villages might have seen some glimpses of pastoralism in our childhood. In Andhra Pradesh, it was not uncommon to see a particular nomadic tribesman go from village to village with a team of ducks or flock of sheep. They would park their birds or animals in the farm for a day or two and move on. The animals or bird droppings were excellent manure for the farm. But today we have had a much more authentic, exhaustive, and well-researched understanding of these fast withering categories of nomads. We commend Ms. Arthi Halbe for her uncommon interest and passion in these groups and for her contribution to understanding and documenting the lesser known aspects of their life for posterity. Thank you, Ms. Aarti, for spending the evening with us, and as Forum of Senior Citizens, we bless you with more success in your career and life. Thank you, Ms. Arthi Halbe, for reading the prayer and for joining us so early in the day from Los Angeles, USA. Thank you, Sri Nitin Dalvi, for joining us from Atlanta, USA, and for introducing our distinguished speaker. We are very happy that the family members of Srimati Telikapalli and Dr. and Mrs. Dalvi could be a part of today's meeting. Thank you for joining us this evening to cherish their memory. We propose to continue with the Zoom meetings till further notice. While the rate of vaccination appears to have picked up momentum, please remain cautious and refrain from going out unless inevitable. I say this in every meeting because the danger of the pandemic has not completely abated, and we need to remain very cautious, especially at our age. Our forthcoming meetings are as follows. Saturday, 20th November 2021, Professor Murali Krishna V. Iyanki, Dr. Raja Ramanna Distinguished Fellow at the DRDO, former National Coordinator for Geospatial Public Health of the Government of India, will speak on smart villages. On Saturday, 18th December 2021, Professor Matthew Varghese, Head of Department of Orthopedics, St. Stephen's Hospital, New Delhi, will speak on learnings from COVID-19. Once again, it was really nice for all of us to get together, even if it is virtually, for this 154th monthly meeting. This December, we will complete 13 years of FOSWL Hyderabad, and we look forward to that milestone shortly. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, till we meet again on the third Saturday of November for our 155th monthly meeting. Stay home and stay safe. Thank you all.
Thank you, Vasgaro.